How's it going, you lovely bunch of bakers? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're making beautiful flaky pan au chocolat. So let's get in the kitchen and get started. My leavened laminated pastry recipe has been working surprisingly well. It's really versatile. First we made kouign-amann, then we made some Danish knots, and we even made some pan au raisin. It's just as good as the unleavened rough puff pastry that I'm so fond of. They both have different uses, which can sometimes overlap, but not all pastries can be made with the unleavened version. If you're looking for something very light and airy like croissant dough, then this one is the one for you. As an added bonus, the method in this recipe has been simplified even further. So let's just get to it. Let me show you how to make these buttery bad boys. Starting with the ingredients, we'll need some white bread flour, yeast, salt, sugar, water, a little bit of butter for the dough itself, an egg for glazing before baking, and we'll need some more butter for creating the layers. We will grate this butter onto the dough, so it must be frozen. Keep it in the freezer until you need it. And of course we'll need some chocolate for our pan au chocolat. Sweet milk chocolate is perfect for this. When it comes to the equipment, we'll need a large tray lined with non-stick paper, a bowl, scales, a dough scraper, a temperature probe, a brush, a rolling pin, and a grater for the butter. And with all that out the way, let's start making the dough. My kitchen is around 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm using water that's just slightly cooler than that. The dough will warm up by a couple of degrees as we mix it. To make the dough, in a large bowl, combine the water, the yeast, the salt, the sugar, and melted butter. Mix it well to dissolve the salt and sugar completely. The reason why I'm using melted butter is because I'm not kneading this dough. If the butter is not melted, or at least very soft, it may not get distributed very evenly throughout the dough. Okay, once the salt and sugar have completely dissolved, add the final ingredient, the white bread flour, and then mix it to a dough. Start by using your dough scraper, then finish it off by hand. Once your dough is fully mixed, place it in a clean bowl and take its temperature. Around 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit is perfect for this. If your dough is slightly warmer, it'll ferment more rapidly. If it's cooler, it'll take longer. Adjust the fermentation times accordingly. At this temperature, the initial room temperature fermentation will take 1 hour, but it will be punctuated by one fold halfway through. So cover your dough up and leave it to ferment for 30 minutes. Folding serves various purposes. It evens out the temperature in the dough, it develops the gluten structure, and it builds tension. My previous recipes for this pastry involved 2 folds. This time, the hydration is lower, so 1 fold is sufficient. To find out more about folding, check out the Steps of Baking playlist. Okay, after the fold, return the dough to the bowl, cover it up, leave it to ferment for another 30 minutes. And now we can start creating the buttery layers. Dust your table and your dough generously with flour. First, flatten it out by hand. Then take your rolling pin and roll it out to a rectangle shape. What I've realized works best is when you don't roll the dough too thin and too large. The larger the dough, the thinner the butter layer. Try to make the edges as straight as you can and give it some nice corners too. Of course it's not going to be perfect, but do your best. Once I'm finished rolling, I like to adjust it with my hands. Once you're happy with the size and shape, take the first block of butter and grate it evenly all over the dough. Using your dough scraper, pick up any stray butter pieces off the table and drop them on top of the dough where they belong. Then dust your hands with flour and press the butter into the dough. We are going to fold this dough into 3 layers. Pick the dough up by one side and fold over 1/3 of it. Stretch it out, adjust it, make sure it's nice and straight. Then pick up the loose piece of dough on the opposite side and then fold it over too. Someone recently asked me why I'm covering the whole dough with butter instead of 2/3 of it. Because as we fold it over, we end up with double the butter in one layer. And I gotta be completely honest, that never even crossed my mind. I have been doing it this way the whole time, and it works. But what the person said definitely makes sense. So you can play around with it, it's up to you. Cover 2/3 of the dough with butter, then fold the uncovered third over, and then finish by folding over the buttery third. Well, I hope that makes sense. Anyway, after folding the dough into 3, dust it with flour and then roll it out to a large rectangle once more. Try to make it as straight as possible and give it some nice corners. Now we have to fold it into 3 again. And this fold is performed exactly the same way as the previous one. Fold 1/3 over, make sure it's nice and straight, then fold over the loose third from the opposite side. Now we are done with the first set of folds. The dough must be wrapped up in cling film and placed in the fridge to cool down. Leave it for around 30 minutes. During this time the gluten will relax. The dough will be much easier to roll out. And the cold dough is also easier to work with. To get a bunch of layers, we need to perform 2 sets of folds, and this is the second set. It is performed exactly the same way as the first set of folds. roll the dough in the direction of the 2 open ends. Make a large rectangle, grate the second piece of butter all over the dough, clean up any stray butter pieces off your table and place them back onto the dough. Flour your hands, press the butter into the dough, fold it into 3, roll it out once more and fold it into 3 again. Then wrap it up and place it back into the fridge, but this time for at least 1 hour. I actually left mine overnight. But from this point onwards, you can use this dough to make anything that you like. Pain au chocolat is probably the simplest thing that you could ever make. This recipe makes 9 little pastries. To get them all to be the same size and shape, we must measure this dough when we roll it out. It should be slightly larger than 30 by 21 centimeters, and that is 12 by 9 inches. You need to account for the trimmings. Once you have rolled it out, trim the edges, make sure you stick to the measurements, then mark the dough and divide it into 9 equal pieces, measuring 10 centimeters by 7 centimeters, and that is 4 inches by 3 inches. Turn the dough so it's standing vertically in front of you. Take a strip of chocolate and place it along one end. Then roll the dough forward until the chocolate is completely covered. Now take a second piece of chocolate and place that in front of the roll. Finally, roll the dough forwards once more, leaving the seam at the bottom. And there you go. That's how you shape pain au chocolat. Pretty simple, right? And yes, I simply took a bar of chocolate and cut it into strips using a knife. There are special chocolate batons made for this purpose, but I can't be bothered seeking out something like that. This works well enough for me. Okay, let's cover these things up and leave them for the final proof, which will take a while. My kitchen's pretty cool at the moment. Plus my slow overnight fermentation will slow this process down too. The final proofing time ended up being around 2.5 to 3 hours. If you are making them on the same day, it might be as short as 1.5 to 2 hours. During the final hour of fermentation, preheat the oven to 170 degrees Celsius, 340 Fahrenheit, fan on, and that'll be 190 Celsius or 375 Fahrenheit, fan off. Once your pastries are looking nice and puffy, they are ready for the oven. Brush them generously with egg, twice perhaps, and now get these bad boys in the oven. They'll take around 25 minutes to fully bake. Once they're all nicely puffed up and beautifully golden brown all over, they're ready. But do not expect perfect pastries, because this is not a perfect pastry recipe. This is a rough laminated pastry recipe. So if some of your pain au chocolat have some cracks on the top, it's character. Munch all the rough looking ones and keep the pretty ones for your friends. And this one is definitely a pretty one. Not too shabby for such a basic handmade recipe, right? It's crispy, flaky, soft and tender, super buttery and moist. These types of pastries are not very sweet. There's not too much sugar in the dough, so we must use sweet milk chocolate for some balance. And you might say, I'm not a big fan of milk chocolate, I want to use dark chocolate. And you're not alone there, I said that too. The first time I made these, I did use dark chocolate. And I'll show you in a second what happens when you use dark chocolate. Let's just say there wasn't much chocolate left in the pastry. This is what happened. You already know, I make the mistakes so you don't have to. But that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching, I'll see you in the next one.